So thank you for joining us this morning. We have some, I think, some nice examples to show you, and also just going to do a little bit on the fly of demonstrating some of these commands. We had a break in July, and it's nice to be back. The purpose of this webinar is to talk to you about fundamentals for drawing lines and points within data graph. And one of the reasons that I wanted to do this webinar as a topic is because I think there's a lot of things we can do in data graph that I know I used to kind of manufacture data to draw lines in particular ways. And in data graph, we have a lot of commands that allow you to do interesting things without having to necessarily manufacture data, and even using a lot of variety of different formats. So with that, let me start just with one simple example. Here is a simple file where we have a plot of some data. And if you've ever done any kind of predictive modeling, this is something I've done a lot, where you have some predicted value and you have some actual value, and you want to plot the two against each other. So here, for example, we have X and Y. And I know what I often do in a lot of webinars, particularly new users, will start out by using the simple plot command. And we can highlight a couple of columns of data. We can click, actually for this, I'm going to do points, is what I really want to show here. So I have my raw data. And if I want to do something like this, where I have a graph that I've created that shows a line with a slope of 1, I know what I used to do in a lot of other programs is actually just make up some data in my data table to draw that line with that slope. In data graph, we have a bunch of different commands, again, that allow you to do things like that without having to create data. So for example, here, I can just add a function command, which is what is drawing the line on this graph here. You can see my function command here is just set to the value X. So this is a very simple function. Now, to get it working in the way that you see in the previous graph, actually, let me go ahead and give my marker some color here in case that makes it easier to see. To get that work, get this working correctly, we need to set a range for this. So right now, this may be really hard to see, but I can zoom in on this region. You can see there's a little bit of a function line that's drawn, but it's only being drawn from X of 0 to X of 1. I can unzoom out of my graph, and if I want this to go to a much larger value of X, I can do that. Again, this is more than we would want. So there's a couple of ways in data graph we can kind of set this line so it will just be there and not interfere with the rest of our data. One way that I find really handy is to actually place this command in a group. And when we do that, we have a setting that we can say not in range. And now the range of the graph is only based on my points. So just let me do that one more time in case you didn't see that. So I selected my command, I clicked on the group icon to place this in the group, and then I can say not in range. Anyway, so this gives me a really quick way to have a line here. And once I have a group like this, I can share it between files. I can easily drag it and drop it. In fact, if you wanted to just demonstrate that for you, I could delete it from here. I've already created it on this command or this graph. So I could actually drag this whole group and drop it onto my other graph, and now I have my line with the slope of 1. So I guess a couple of things that I'm illustrating here. One is, again, that I can use the function command to draw lines in various ways. And also, once I create a line like that, that is useful, either the individual command or the group, I can drag it and drop it to move it to other graphs. So you don't have to keep recreating these commands once you have them set up for you. Oh, I see. There was a question. How did you make a group? Just quickly, again, I can show you that it's very easy to make a group. I can have any command, and if you want to place that in a group, you can click the command, click this group icon up in the toolbar that placed the command in a group. But these are also things that you can drag around. I can have a lot more than just one command in a group. I can drag commands in and out of groups. So groups are really handy for a lot of different reasons. And I don't want to get too sidetracked on that, but it's almost worth a webinar just on using groups in order to organize your data and create masks. In fact, actually the third webinar that we do this month is going to be all about masks, and we will talk a lot about groups in that, because that's one way to effectively create kind of more complicated logical expressions for what data you include by having nested groups. Okay, so we've done just a simple example with the function, with the line. Now let's talk a little bit more broadly about the different commands that we have available in order to draw lines and points. So I created this, this within data graph, and one of the things that you may notice when you look at this is the data table, and I have a check mark that I have within the data table. Now, if you're used to only putting in numbers and in text, then this is one of the things we're going to also use this in an example when we talk about the points command in a little bit later in the webinar. But let me just show you this really quick, because this is an interesting way to use the program that I don't always use myself, but I think is pretty cool. So within the system, you have a character map that you can get to, and you can get to it under the edit menu, emoji and symbols. There's also a shortcut to do Control Command Spacebar. So if I do here Control Command Spacebar, then the character map will pop up. And anywhere that I have my cursor within data graph, I can double click on a character and that will populate it within my data table. So for example, here, I already have the check mark, but if I wanted to do something different, we'll put an arrow in there. That one looks sort of small, but just to give you a sense of how this works, I could go into any of these symbols. I could do emojis and make this a smiley face. So if I wanted to, I just double click on the character and it will populate it within my table. So I just wanted to show you that to start, because we're going to use some of the to do custom characters for symbols within points. This was actually a question that was on the discussion board this week about having more options for points commands. So I want to show you how you can use the character map to represent XY coordinates, to give you a lot of access to different types of points. Anyway, so back to lines and points. Here we have a table that I just summarized for you, the commands that can draw lines in various ways. I guess truth in advertising, other commands obviously draw different types of lines, but these are the ones that we're just going to really focus on in terms of representing data. And in addition to the command being listed, I also have listed some categories here. And actually, I took a screenshot of this that I thought I would. There we go. So hopefully you can see this well at home. Here's the different commands, and what I'm trying to convey here are the ways in which we can use these commands to represent lines within our graphs. Where specified means that I can specify where I want a line drawn without having to have any data in my data table. The lines command allows you to do that, but you also can use data that's from the data table, or you can use a combination of specified values and values from the data table. If this doesn't make sense, I'm going to walk through an example that will show you. But this is in contrast to, if you look at the standard plot command where we're plotting X and Y coordinate locations, this has only plotting data that's from the data table, both the plot and then the plots that can draw multiple lines in different colors. Those are just drawn from the data table. And we also, as I mentioned, the function command, you can specify what function you want to draw. You don't need any data to do that. Fit command also draws lines, but obviously that's based on data that we have in the data table. And we also have the label command is also a way to actually draw a line where you are drawing it at a specific point within the XY coordinate system, or those lines can actually be outside of the range of the coordinate system as well, but pinpointed on a particular X and Y location. And the extra axis, as I thought about this, is also another way to draw a line. It's just a line that has tick marks on it that can be arbitrarily placed within the domain of your graph. So let's go back to talk now a bit more about just the lines command and how this works. And what do I mean when I say specified versus data table versus combination? So let's make a simple example where I am just going to start by just typing in some data. Here's some X data, and I have 2, 5, 6. Okay, so here's a few values of X. Now say I wanted to draw lines at each of these X locations. If I start with a graph where there's nothing there yet, then the lines command actually has to know the extent to which the y-axis should be. So if I just take, and here's the shortcut for lines command, and I say I want X lines at the locations here, it is, again, difficult for it to know how to draw them because I don't have a y-axis yet. So let me just put in a point command, because when I do that, the point command, just by, actually I didn't even necessarily mean to have the X's in there, just a blank point command where it's specified 1 and 1. And in any case, this, or actually maybe it's better, let me take that back. This is better because now you see how the point command is drawing points at each of these X locations, and Y is specified as just 1. This is, again, an example of how I can have data that's coming from the data table, or I can just type in the command itself specifying where the values are. So for each of these X locations, I'm doing the same Y location of 1. Let me make this, again, a little bit bigger, so this is hopefully something that you can see. And then my lines are just being drawn at those same exact locations. So what the lines command does is it will draw a line at any X or Y location that I either specify or I pull from the data table. And it only knows one axis. So again, I have to have some other data there for the lines to be shown. So just to illustrate this a little bit more, if I exclude my points command, now I'm not seeing anything. But if I show it again, then I see my lines and those points. So I can hide the points command because that's just not what I'm showing here. I want to show you the lines. I can increase these the size of my lines. So again, this is sort of simple. I mean, it's just a line in the particular, in an X direction, but there's so much flexibility that I can get by having this command to do all sorts of different things. So first of all, I just want to show you that I can easily also switch between X and Y directions, but I can also just not use what's in the data table. I could just type in that I want 2 lines drawn at X equal to 2 and X equal to 5. The other thing that the lines command allows you to do, in addition to just drawing straight lines at specific locations, is that you can define the extent to which the line is drawn. So if you expand this command, notice how there's an extent setting. I can go ahead and change this to be something that I specify, and then I could type in a value that I want this to go from 2 to 5, and now all of my lines are being drawn across that same extent. Or I could have this come from the data table. I could have other columns where I specify how I want those lines to be drawn. And based on each row, it would change that. So again, if I just, let's add another column, call this extent, and this is 2 and 3. Well, actually, I'll use my X column for this as well. 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. So I can change my lower value to this, and now actually this one's so high that nothing is being drawn. I could make that a bit higher. So now you can maybe sort of see how these could become more and more complicated. And I could draw these, again, in various ways, my X lines, my Y lines, to represent different things. And there's a lot of things we can do with this. We can also add color schemes into our lines that we show. So if I wanted the line itself to have a different color, depending on what the extent was, I could go ahead and create a color scheme. And now each one of my lines has a different color. And so hopefully you can see how this is, again, a simple example, but you could do a lot with this, and you can create some really interesting graphs. So let me go now into talking more about the connect command, because the lines command is just going to do straight lines between X and Y. There are some different styles that you can explore, but the connect command is in particular one that I have fun using, because it is something that is almost deceptively simple. Let me just create, to start with, a blank graph and add a connect command. And this is another one where, again, I can specify exactly 2 points that I want to connect. I could say I want to, notice how there's an X1 and a Y1 and an X2 and a Y2. So if I just want to draw a simple line that goes between two X and Y coordinates, I can go ahead and do that. I have a 1, 1, and then I could say 2, 2. And now I have this very simple line that I've drawn. I can go ahead and increase the line style. I can add different end caps to this, either an arrow on one end or an arrow on both ends. These lines also don't have to just be straight. So I can change these lines to be a curved line. They can also be stepped lines. And you can even change the way in which the step is done. So a lot of different variations as to how you can draw the line itself. But just keeping this for now as a straight line, one of the things that we can do is not just draw a single line, but we can change one of our variables here to be a column, and then it will draw multiple lines using the data that comes from that column. So if I change this X here to the values that are in this column, now there's 4 rows within my table. So I've created now 4 different lines. Maybe I wouldn't want the arrows like that. Maybe I want the end caps to be somewhat different. They could be round. And the line width and the line color here can also be based on data. So I can have a varying line width based on my extent, and you can see how these scale to different widths. And I can also change the color. I could do that based on the extent. I think even maybe just, well, create a new color scheme, but I could have used the one that was there. So you can get very creative with these, with the connect command, and how you draw different types of lines. And if I go under the online examples, and I'd already been searching on the connect command here, you can get a sense for just the really wide variety of different types of graphs. Not all of these are specifically the connect command, but you can see there's a bunch of them here. This Gantt chart is the connect command. Here's another Gantt chart. One that I thought was pretty cool that I made recently was this, or somewhat recently, was this chord diagram. And this could add color schemes. You could do all sorts of things here. So this has a varying number of points. and different lines that you can show. So this could be a template that you could play with. And again, doing this with just simple XY coordinates would be very difficult, but with the connect command, this is not a hard graph to create. It takes a little bit of a little bit of thought in terms of getting it working, but again, really interesting things. This dendrogram plot, I thought this was also a really interesting one to make too. And this image that you see here, this is made with one connect command and one points command. So pretty cool, I think, that you're able to make this graphic represent this data using just these two commands. And you can see the, if we want to look at the, again, check where my input is coming from, to see the format of the data. Here's how I have this set up. So there's an X value, there's a level associated with each of these points, and there's the X2 value and the second level. And so that's mapped into these coordinate systems that you see there. One comment on genomics using something similar. So that would be interesting actually to see some of that data and how this could be used for that. Okay, so we've talked about the connect command, we've talked about the lines command, the fact that we can do line segments, we can do whole lines, we can do these curved lines. Another thing that I want to mention is that for some of these commands, we can go across plots. So we don't have to just have a single line within the graph. The lines command actually can cross graphs. So as long as I have this one open, I'll go ahead and maybe use this for a simple example where, actually, I'll just go ahead and start a new one. Let me start a new file and show you how I might do this. So if I just have some simple data, and we'll do X and Y, and we'll have Y2. So just something simple. And here's my Y2. Okay. So if I had this data and I wanted to make a plot of this, again, there's my back with the basic plot command. I go ahead and make, I'm going to split this graph. So I'm going to split in the Y direction because these are sharing an x-axis. And if I want these to be a stacked graph, I can go ahead and do that where I create two commands, and then I have the stacking represented on the right-hand side of each command to allow me to place where I want that to be drawn. So here I have two graphs, and to make this maybe a little clearer, I often set my box style to be an axis box, or I think that, yeah, that's the one. So now you can see, hopefully, that increase my pen size a little bit here. So you can see the remove grid lines. I kind of like that too. You can see my two graphs, that these have a separation between them. And say I would like to have a line that's drawn across the two graphs to be able to help me to compare a location. Again, I can put in a lines command, and maybe I want a line drawn at x is equal to 2. Let's go ahead and I can change the line style. We can change the color here. Maybe I'll make this a little bit bigger. One thing I know, it's always tempting to just move these from the using the slider, which is very handy, but you can also just do a multiple of what the pen is. So here, if I know I want this line just to be a little bit thicker than the other lines, I could just have, for example, here 4 times the pen to make that larger. Then if I change my overall pen size, they're all going to scale appropriately. Anyway, so now I have a line at x is equal to 2, and if I want that line to go across multiple axes, I can go ahead and say extent is all axis, and now I have a line that goes all the way across. So there's only certain commands that allow you to cross axes like this. The lines command allows you to do that. The range command, which in some ways is another way of drawing lines, if you wanted to just see what that does. This is drawing over a particular range, but if I wanted this, say from 1 to 2, then again, I can have that interval be across everything. So it shows a range across an entire graph. Go ahead and delete that one. Another thing that you can do, I mentioned briefly about the label command, is another one that can go outside of the axis range. So I'm going to go ahead and add a label. And let me actually make this, scale this up a bit so you can see this a little bit better. And same thing, I could make this wider, some multiple of the pen, and I can also change my color here. You can also change the font color if I want that to match exactly. So here I have my label, and I have options for where I position this label. So right now, this is just drawing a line to a specific point. So I can tell it that I want this to be drawn at x equal to 2 and y equal to 2, for example, and now it's going to draw at that point. Notice I can drag this around, and that will change the location that you see there, but I could go ahead and bring this back. But say again that I want this to be outside of my region, I can change this to be at different spots, where here you see it's now above and outside of my axis. We can put it on different sides here. And not all of these will scale. So in this case, if I wanted it there, I'd have to add more to my margin, which I can certainly do that. But you can see now how this is now pointing to a particular Y location, but the label itself is outside of my graph. So this is a line that can be drawn outside of the XY axis, but it's still pinpointing a particular X location. And it could go, again, it can go below, but now I'm not seeing it. That's actually, I might as well just show you in case any of you aren't sure how to do that. There's a margin setting here that I could add in maybe 50, or you can, just like in other places in data graph where you're formatting, I can type in actual numerical units of measure, or not numerical, or type in units of measure. So I have 1 inch here, or I could have this be 5 centimeters if I needed a larger gap. And then this arrow, you can see I can move it along, and it will show me up here, or will allow me up here to specify the exact X location. Okay, so let's go ahead and continue, and just checking the time. I want to make sure I get through some of the other examples that I have here, because we're still going to talk more about points. And I wanted to, let's see, I wanted to show you one more lines example. This is one actually that we just posted. If you go into the online examples, and let me take away my search. So this one was just posted actually last night. And this is a graph where we have, or a file where we have graphs that appear to be in the margins. It actually is a panel graph where the graph has been split in both the X and Y direction. So for example, if I changed my box style to be an axis box, then you can see where there's actually 4 axes here, or 4 panels, 4 graphs. But if I show it like this, it appears as though they're in the margins. I've adjusted the sizes here, so it gives that look. And there's instructions here on how this was created. If you go into the README, you can look at a little bit more as to how this is set up. But one of the things that I thought would be interesting to add to this, the post on the discussion board was really looking for something like this, where it showed the histograms. But I very easily also created a graph like you see here, where it's showing the lines to indicate the density of this scatter plot. So this is a combination of points and lines. And if you want to play with this template itself, there are sliders where I can, oops, might have to check that. Looks like there's something that's somewhere that just popped up. But you can see here, there's sliders that allow me to change the width, and I can do this sort of interactively. I'm not sure what that slider's not very happy right now. Go ahead and, there we go. Okay, so again, really easy to create this. This is just simply a lines command where I have both the Y lines and the X lines, and they're in different locations within this panel graph to indicate that density. And again, you could make these lines also be different colors. So you could have, you can also do this with a date range where you have lines that represent different days, and each line has a different color depending on some metric with that data. Okay, and just I guess one question quickly, yes, we do record these and they will be available later on YouTube. We actually got behind on posting our last webinars, but we're going to post them probably by Monday, and then we'll post this one also next week for any of you interested in kind of getting a chance to slow me down a little and watch this on YouTube. It will be there. And yeah, and I can just show this again. If you go under File, Online Examples, that's where I found the graph that you see here. And this is, again, searchable, so I can look through and search on different types of graphs. Okay, and I don't necessarily need that. Okay, the next example that I want to show, I want to move on now to talking a little bit more about points. And the first file I want to show you, drag this over, expand this out. So this is a file where I've manufactured some data. I'm using a function column. You can create those with the small icon that you see above. And each of these, I'm using a random number generator. This is generating a random, a normal distribution where it's at 0 and a standard deviation of 1. You can also specify a mean. If you give two numbers, then it will give the mean and the standard deviation, but we'll just go ahead and leave this at 0 for now. So I'm generating X and Y and Z data, and I'm plotting this with the points command. Now, so one of the questions I think that people sometimes have is that we have both the plot and the points both allow you to do points, but really the points command is the kind of workhorse when it comes to doing different things with points. And it's very easy to overlay these. In this case, really, I am just doing a scatter graph, so there's no need to have a lines command with this, or plot command with this. But the way that we do this, as you probably know, we've seen this again before, we highlight our columns, we can add a points command very quickly. What I want to show you is that there's a particular thing that happens when I have a lot of points. So when I start to increase my points to a certain value, then eventually you'll see how they've now turned into a pixel representation of the points themselves. So one of the things that we do in data graph is we have this built-in switch that moves you over from points to pixels when you have a lot of points. You can adjust that. There's a preferences menu under data graph preferences where you can change when this switch takes place. But it's really a handy thing to do, because then if you want to plot millions of points, you can do it. There was actually a post I saw at one point that was from it was on a MATLAB blog that said, you know, if you have a million XY coordinates, you'd never actually want to put them on a plot. Well, maybe you do. And I know not everyone works with that volume of data, but if you have a lot of data, having it switch over to pixels actually gives you a nice option for being able to still view that data in an XY coordinate system and have the program still be pretty snappy. Notice that this graph, I had this set up with a color scheme, actually both a color scheme and a scheme for the size of the points. So here, if I expand the points command, the size depends on this Z variable, and the color also is dependent upon Z, and that color scheme is shown here in the variables list. If you've never created these before, this is actually very easy to do. I can go into the one that doesn't have a color scheme and say I want the color of these points to depend on Z, and you can just say create color scheme and it will make a new color scheme for you. I've modified the one that it created. There's a bunch of shortcuts in the gear menu on the color scheme itself for changing how many categories you have. So if it's a color scheme that's based on numerical values, then the data will be binned. So here I could say I want less entries, so I'm going to change my stride, and then I also get different color suggestions that I can use. Anyway, something for you to play with a little bit more. But I guess the point here is that even when you change into the pixel representation, the color scheme actually will still be represented. Obviously, the whole point of the pixel is to make the size smaller, so you're not going to see the point anymore, but you will be able to still represent color schemes. Let's see, there's I think I answered one of these questions. There is a question on the chat about how many native functions are built in and where do I access these, and how can you create new functions and add to the list? Can functions be imported from Mathematica, etc.? So the functions are, if you go to if I wanted to add a function command into this, then you can type in functions. We actually, I guess we don't really have a function list within this. You would be typing in your own function that you're interested in. What you can do is you can go into, if you look at the fit command, then the fit command does have an arbitrary fit where you can have a function library. So here, for example, I made my fit. I can go into the gear command and I have this function library that I've created for functions that I've needed. So I don't know if that quite helps, but you can type in any arbitrary function that you like, and then you can save them here. Maybe something for the future would be to add in some functions into the actual function command instead of what I do now, which would be, just typing in a particular function and then typing in a range over which I want that function drawn. You can see that I just added in the sine function here. Anyway, that's, if this is something you're interested more in and have suggestions about what would be useful, then definitely let us know, and you can let us know on the discussion board online. There's a place for giving suggestions. You can also always email us at our help email. Okay, so we've talked about points, and we've talked about graphs where we have lots of points. What I want to show you next is a little bit more about customizing points. Let me go ahead, and my mouse is acting a little, there we go. So I want to pull this graph away, and here we go. Here's the example that I was looking for. Okay. So there's a few different graphs here that I'm going to walk through and show you how did I create this. So this is a graph that's using the points that are in the one of the markers that's in the points command natively. So if I create a points command, I have an XY, I have XY values, I have a list of markers that are shown, and can select from any of these different marker styles. But the question had come up about what if you want to do something that's somewhat different, and can we have a way to build in a custom marker style? So first of all, I guess I wanted to show you an example where what I've done is I've used text in order to define my locations for my XY coordinates. And first of all, let me actually do this one from scratch, just so that you can see step by step what I did. So what I'm doing is I'm taking an XY plot of points, and I'm using the labels functionality within the points command to place a text label on my graph. This is actually something I do all the time. I do different types of text labels to get different types of effects in graphs. And actually, so you can see this a little better, I'm going to switch the location of my data and my points command, and you can see how within the points command itself there is a labels setting that I could just type in a text label there. So I just typed in A, and then there's an alignment option. By default, what the label is doing is it's aligning away from the point, but you could actually change the label to be centered, and then this offset, instead of being the value of the point, see, notice the offset by default is the same as the point value, so that the label is not right on the point itself. But I could make this 0, 0. Now I have my letter at the point location. Now, one of the things that you can also do is then you can change the marker style to being no point, and you only see the letters. One of the things to pay attention to is that this is, maybe a little technical, but the actual value, or the centering of the A that you see, is not exactly the same as the point. You can see how the A is like slightly aligned differently. Now, if I do a capital A, it is aligned more appropriately in terms of the what you might visually see as the center of the A is also going to be where the actual XY coordinate system is that I've located. So, and this is one of the reasons why also we're careful when we add new markers to try and make sure that the markers in the list that you see here are centered in such a way that they visually represent that specific XY coordinate location. So you can do things like this, but just be aware that the point visually might be slightly offset if I remove my point from view. Okay, but what I wanted to show you also was that not just making the label be this one value, but I can change this label to come from a column. So I have a text column over here, and I'm going to select that as my label. And now every single point is labeled with the text that you see from my data table. So, I mean, I could change this here. This one could be A, this one could be A, this one could be B. But you can see how I could, again, remove my point and then just have text representing those points. And this could be a word, it could be longer than that. The other thing that that I want to show you is how, again, you can use symbols. You can use the character maps in order to be able to show points. So here, for example, this is just a little bit of a fun example. I am not showing the point. The marker is set to no point, but the labels are all the same. And the label that I put in was the smiley face character. So again, if you didn't see this earlier, if you didn't join us in the beginning, I can do Control, Command, Space Bar, or go to the edit menu to pick up the character map. And any of these characters, if I want to use them anywhere where you have text, any Unicode character can be used. So I can go ahead and, for example, I could just do one of these, and I'm going to double click on the character map that puts the football in there, and you can see that symbol now being used for my point. So anything that's in the character map you can use. You also can do interesting things where you map symbols. So this is a graph where I have some points as the Space Invader, some points as the alien. And to do this, I used a mapping column. So let me go ahead and now I'll show you how I did that. Basically, it's this column here. This is, the column is called symbol. And what I did was I added a map column, and the map column has these different ways that you can map. You can actually map between groups of data, connect groups of data. But here, I'm just mapping a symbol based on this group column. So I would select that I want to map based on group. As you can see here, I'm specifying the mapping, and I just typed in that group A is the alien and group B is the Space Invader. So when I then create this column, this is what the column is populated with, and the symbol column is what I'm using for my label. If I change then in any of these the group, notice that I don't have to change anything else. I'm just changing this data, and it will change the symbol that's being used to represent this data. So I thought that was that was pretty cool. And again, gives you access to all these different commands all these different symbols in terms of being able to create really interesting kind of graphs. Okay, so another thing that I actually wanted to make sure that I pointed out was 4 points. The fact that we can draw points that are in an XY coordinate system, like you see here. We also have the points that are drawn using the actual box command. And this has become, I think, a pretty popular way to represent data. I'm going to go into the online examples, and let's just type on box so we can pull up one of these. And I don't know if I have one here that shows you the points as well. So let's open this file up. And the symbol that you see here shows all these different points. This is being drawn with a box command, where if just to illustrate, let me make a copy of this. So I'm going to select my command, hold down the Option key, and drag it to make a clone of this. And notice how the type is set to points. If I change this type to whisker, might be actually a little hard to see the line. Let me go ahead and make this much bigger. Now you can hopefully see that outline. So this is overlaying a box plot on top of a points distribution. So if I just maybe start from scratch so you can see how this would work. If I have a column and I create a box plot, and I would say that the position of the data is going to depend on one of my columns, which here is a column called class. Now I've created my box plots, but I can again make a copy of this and overlay points on top of that. So these are drawing very different points than the XY coordinate system. It's actually drawing drawing every point that you see and trying to give you a representation of the distribution of the points themselves. And let me see, I had Eric raised his hand, which is a functionality. This is the first time someone has done this, and I'm not sure if I can see Eric, where your question is. And I apologize for that. Again, Zoom sometimes does, if you have a question and you want to put it on the Q&A board, is probably the best way to do that. And I'm trying to check on the chat, but again, sometimes baffles me a little bit how this all works. Oh, Eric said it was a mistake. Okay, so no hand raised. That's fine, no problem. So you can see the points from the XY system, points from our box plots, and the box plots points, we have added the ability to do more with them. You know, one of the things that we find that when we added points into the box plot, initially they were just very simple markers, and people asked for more options with them. So now there are not just circles. You have a more limited character set, but you can add points for markers. You can also change the point color within these plots to, again, be based on a color scheme. So I just created a new color scheme. I'm kind of exaggerating these points just to make sure that you can see them through the webinar. But I could, again, do all sorts of things with this. I could represent a completely different variable. Here I'm representing the same variable that's grouping them on the x-axis, but you could show a different variable using the point color in the color scheme. So that's kind of an interesting way to use the points option within the box command. And again, since these are layered, I can go ahead and hide the box plot itself and just show the distribution of points if that's something that I want to do. And I'm just checking to see, I know someone's been answering questions on our board. So I'm not sure if there's anything there that I need to necessarily answer. I'll go ahead, and we're actually about to run out of time and wrap things up. And trying to think of some closing things that I wanted to say. I guess one thing that I did want to go over that I didn't show you yet is the let's see, where's the file that I had this on? Well, actually, I'll just create a new one very quickly. I talked about how you can have this issue where if you have way too many points represented as images, then the program will slow down. And so we have this ability to switch to a pixel representation, so you're not limited in the amount of points that you end up drawing. So there is an issue that can also happen with lines, where the line join, depending on, actually, let me go ahead and I'll create some random numbers for this also. So if I have some random numbers, actually, I'll just show you how to generate some data. So say I want to have 100 random numbers, I can just put in my row number, so that just creates a 101, 1 to 100, and then I'm going to add in a little bit of random noise into this. So this is now a column of X values where I have some noise in that. Actually, I'll make this my Y value, and then to create my X values, again, I could just say that this is my X value sequentially, and plot these data. And if I do that using a plot command, you can see how there is a little bit of a back and forth in this line. Again, the plot command does have some point options. It's not as, you don't have as many point options as you do in the points command themselves. Itself, partly because these points are, we're very careful in how this is set up, so that if you have a transparency in the point itself, and I think I can zoom in on this and maybe show you, that if I make the point transparent, the line does not go into the point. And I've seen this in a number of graphing programs where the symbol itself will be overlain with the point underneath. And again, it may seem like it just looks nice when it's all set, but it is something that has to be done carefully to make sure that it doesn't overlap. Anyway, The point of what I wanted to show you here is that, let me go ahead and zoom back out again, that I have this line that has some squiggle associated with it. Now, if I increase my pen size and make this a thick line, and let me actually increase now some of my, my noise. So you can start to see how the, there we go. Now it's even more exaggerated. How the, oops, how the, there's this sharp look to the lines that are being connected. And this can be something that can actually really exaggerate your data if you have points that are close together, but are going like just a little bit back and forth. One of the things we just added in the recent version is this option of a line join, where the default is what's called a miter join, but you can also have what's referred to as a bevel or a round join in between the points. And you can see how the extent of the line is slightly changing depending on which type that we draw. And the miter joins can get actually, if the points are very close together, they can get really extremely exaggerated, and it's not your data doing that, it's just that the lines are so close for them to be able to match and create that type of join. It gives that very pointy appearance. This is something that we're considering in future versions to, that if that exaggeration is occurring, to have an automatic setting that picks between a particular type of join to try and give the best representation for the data. So just something to be aware of in terms of when you're drawing lines. Now, it's not as much of an issue if you don't have a very thick line. And in fact, the other thing that can happen to be aware of is that when you're drawing a line thickness, again, if you have a lot of small noise between points that you're trying to draw, then each one of those line segments is being drawn. And if you increase your pen width to be above a pixel, and you have a lot of data, so if you have maybe 10,000 points that are all very, have that little bit of noise, then that's something that can slow down the program. If you have that issue, the best thing to do is to keep your pen size down below either at a half or at a single pixel for manipulating the data and creating your graphs. And then if for publication you want to make it larger, you can go ahead and increase that size. But the program switches into a different drawing mode that when you have those thick lines, that can slow things down. And it's actually not something that, it's something drawn by the system that we necessarily can't control within Datagraph itself. So we are at noon, and just checking to see, it looks like there's no other questions on the board. I hope that this was, sort of helpful for you in terms of getting a better sense of the different commands. I really do encourage, people using the program in particular to check out the lines command and the connect command and just play with them, because again, it's a different format of data. It's a different way of thinking about data. There is a question about, are there any plans to release a version for Windows in the future? And we don't actually have a plan for a Windows version at this time. So sorry to those of you who might be interested in that. Yeah, just a comment on binning, and not everyone is a Windows fan. So we do work really hard to have the program be highly optimized for the Mac platform, and having a great version of Datagraph on Mac. And what we don't want to do is have a version that is not as good on a different operating system. So we're really focused on creating the best version that we can here for Mac. And yes, absolutely, we will have a version on the future Mac ARM processor. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar. We'll go ahead and see you next week for those of you who are able to attend, and we will post this on the YouTube channel. please subscribe to our YouTube channel. The more subscribers we get, we get additional ways that we can interact with you through our YouTube videos. And we, of course, really appreciate your support of the program. So have a great weekend and take care.